Welcome to the What Really Happened radio show. Putting America first, second, and third. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It's Monday, May 26, 2014. It is Memorial Day today, and this is the day when the government honors all those young people who were killed in all these wars for the bankers, and then, of course, were no longer a cost to the government because they were now dead. And I don't know about you, but I found it incredibly hypocritical for Obama and much of the rest of the government to get up there and talk about the honor and glory of all these dead soldiers at the same time they are provably putting the screws to those who managed to survive their time in combat. And it's a little infuriating, I think. And I'm not even a veteran. And I find it extremely angering. Now, we have a lot of stuff to talk about today. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443, 800-313-9443. And because it's a Monday and a holiday, the lovely Lady Claire will be joining us today in the third hour to bring her unique point of view on what is going on in the world. Couple of program notes. This coming Thursday, May 29th, James Fetzer will be our on-air guest talking about Jim Norville's book, which basically documents Lee Harvey Oswald helped the FBI foil an assassination plot against John F. Kennedy in Chicago. So he was an undercover informant working for the government. The assassins figured out he must have been the snitch, and that's why he was set up as the patsy in Dealey Plaza. On June 13th, Gilbert Levin will be joining us to discuss some of the latest hemming and hawing about the planet Mars coming out of Never a Straight Answer. And Norman Finkelstein will be our guest sometime in June. We haven't nailed the date down just yet. We're also going to be getting Dee McLachlan back. She was the author of these children's books about monster corn and banking and the three tall buildings, and apparently the books are doing so well, the Australian corporate media decided they needed to go in and smear her and ridicule her point of view and warn parents you should never, ever, ever, ever let your children anywhere near these books. So we're going to be talking with Dee McLachlan about that one and the impact she's obviously having. Now, over at whatreallyhappened.com, we relinked to a video from Memorial Day 2 years ago, where McCain is out there doing the usual speechification about how war is glorious and glamorous, and you should all want to go off and, die for the name of freedom and democracy and actually for private central banking. And he was confronted by somebody in the audience who stood up and said, let's talk about the USS Liberty. That was when Israel attacked the USS Liberty, killed 30 U.S. service people, tried to frame Egypt for it. That plot failed. And everybody covered it up, including John McCain's father, Admiral McCain, who basically went into all the surviving members of the crew of the USS Liberty and said, if you ever talk about Israel attacking your ship, you will never see the light of day again. So he got challenged on that, and well, he should, because this idea of a Memorial Day, certainly its purpose is an honorable one, but the uses that it's being put to by the federal government and by the politicians, it is absolutely rank with hypocrisy. Which gets us on down to the growing Veterans Administration scandal. We're seeing an article that came out of Blacklisted News. What we have seen so far is just the tip of the military abuse iceberg, and there are people who are going public all across the country about how they were maltreated or ignored or just marginalized. We're hearing all these stories about all the rules the VA has come up with to cut off benefits to soldiers for minor legal infractions, for refusing a treatment they think may be harmful. The doctors can come in and say, we're going to take this syringe of drain cleaner and shove it into your arm. And the soldier says, no, I don't think that's a good idea. All right, that's it. Your benefits are cut off. We're talking about the flood of soldiers and sailors and air people who get to the very, very end of their honorable service, and then the military finds some excuse to give them a dishonorable discharge, at which point their benefits get cut off again. This thing is a scandal. Now, last week on The Daily Show, Jon Stewart, in an effort to take some of the heat off Barack Obama, was hammering home the point that this kind of maltreatment of military veterans has been going on all along, and he's absolutely right. Because the instant you, as serving military, ceases to be of any use to the war effort, they don't want to deal with you. It's, from their point of view, it's wasted money. We're spending all this money keeping these people alive and semi-healthy, and we can't put a rifle in their hand again. This war is over budget. We've got to start cutting money to the VA. Now, over in Congress, there is a growing call to the Department of Justice and Eric Holder, meaning nothing's ever really going to happen, to investigate whether or not the VA's behavior with these secret waiting lists and simply shoving people into a corner until they die crosses from mere incompetence to criminal misconduct. I would say it went over that line a long, long time ago. The VA is now admitting that delays to health care have caused 23 deaths among our veterans. And if you believe that number is that low, I have some of Saddam's nuclear weapons to sell you. But why? Boy, it's getting all this press all over. You know why? Because Obama is throwing the Veterans Administration under the media bus to take the focus off of Benghazi, NSA spying on us all, IRS targeting of dissidents, Fusion Center targeting of protesters. These are all major scandals. Some of them reach the level of impeachability. But oh no, we're going to just set up the Veterans Administration to be the scapegoat between now and November. That's really what's going on and why there's so much attention on it. And I'm not saying the Veterans Administration doesn't deserve a good shellacking for their poor treatment of our veterans. They do, but not to the exclusion of these other abuses by the government against the American people and the American veteran. By the way, for those of you who are still supporting of Obamacare, take a look at the Veterans Administration, because that is the model of government health care. They literally were operating covert death panels. Oh, this veteran's injuries are too great. They're going to cost us too much. Put him on the long waiting list and maybe he'll die and we won't have to spend the money. That's government-managed health care. I remember a scandal a couple of years ago where the VA hospital were doing colonoscopies on the veterans, and they weren't sterilizing the proctoscope. And they managed to generate an epidemic of I think it was hepatitis. They first patient they did had hepatitis. They used the same instrument on all the soldiers that followed. Something 30 or 40 veterans had hepatitis added on top of everything else they were having to deal with. That's government-managed health care for you right there. All righty, so let's turn over to Russia, Ukraine, and Europe. It's been a very tumultuous series of elections. Ukraine's chocolate king, Petro Poroshenko, who is a billionaire, he's an oligarch, and he is leading in the election with 25% of the votes counted. Now, the reason the count is going so slow is that Ukraine's security service discovered a virus inside the Central Election Commission's computer server that was designed to delete the results of the presidential vote. So now they can't trust their computerized vote, and they're going back to a hand count. But even that is not above suspicion, because we posted a photo to whatreallyhappened.com. The Ukrainians like to use these transparent, see-through ballot boxes to convey the impression it is an open, transparent election. And yet, if you look inside the boxes, you will see stacks of votes on the bottom, neatly folded in a pile. That is absolutely impossible, dropping them one at a time through that top slot. So we already know this election is just an absolute, complete fraud. And Ukraine will still suffer under the rule of oligarchs. The new incoming government is just as corrupt as the one that got kicked out. We got to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're going to take a phone call here. Bear in Colorado. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What is on your mind today?
Good afternoon. I've been thinking a lot about this because I've had to change my worldview about 15 times in the last 20 years. And I'm getting down to the point where every man has to decide for themselves. You can't lead someone. You have to show by example. And because we can only live by example. We only have one master, and each man has to decide whether they're going to serve the Creator and do no harm, or become a mercenary for lucre. And I think what's happened with the veterans, they've been deceived to the point where they are relying solely on blind patriotism, so they don't have to look at the fact that they're actually mercenaries.
Well, it's not really working. Most of those kids in uniform are smart enough to realize that what they're really doing is not what the recruiters told them they were going to be doing. That's why there is such a problem with antidepressants and suicides among our serving military. They're smart enough to realize what it is they're really doing. They're coming to the same conclusion that Major General Smedley Butler did, only it took Butler 30 years to do it, and most of these kids are figuring it out in just a few months.
Well, the main thing is when you serve lucre, when you serve just for the money, and you are actually doing harm to another man or woman, then as a mercenary, this is how mercenaries have been treated throughout history. You know, the worst thing that a ruler wanted was a mercenary, unpaid mercenary in their midst.
Well, I understand from the point of view of the government that they're probably treating these military people like mercenaries and the veterans like mercenaries, and I understand that for those of us who understand the genuine motives for the war, we can see them as mercenaries. However, I think we need to look at what is the intention of those kids in the uniform, because I don't think any of them joined the military thinking, I'm going to get paid to go out and kill people at random. As you said, they've been deceived into thinking it's patriotic, that they're bringing democracy to these countries, that they're freeing these people from evil tyrants. They are as much victims as anybody else in this war. And because these serving military did not intend to be mercenaries, I don't think we can really call them as such.
Well, I'm not saying that I'm here to blame anybody or to label anybody, but every man should do it for themselves. And that's why, if you are going to take on the mantle of United States citizen, you're a mercenary. And you can't have 1 foot in and 1 foot out. You can either serve the master, your Creator, through whatever, either whether it's Jesus or whatever, or you can serve the slave master who is hiring mercenaries and giving them slaves.
Yeah, but Bear, you need to remember our government and our military high command, have a whole clerical corps within all the branches of military to assure these kids in uniform that what they're doing is what God wants, that it's blessed by God, that they're going to go to heaven if they die in combat, the same stuff they were doing back during the Crusades. And I think we have to get back down to intent. Those kids who joined the military because they thought it was good for the country and that they were doing their patriotic duty and they were bringing democracy to these invaded nations and freeing the people from evil tyrants, you have to look at motive here, and the motives, at least at the beginning, were very honorable. Of course, once they're there in the war zone, it's not like they can put down their rifle and say, I've changed my mind, or they get brought up on desertion charges. And they wind up, in more danger from their own officers than from the enemy troops.
I learned a new word the other day. It's called stratocracy, and it's government ruled by chiefs, military chiefs. So here you have the commander-in-chief and the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and you have the CEOs of all the corporations. These guys know what they're doing, and they are not doing it in a way that serves the Creator. So therefore, they are.
It doesn't even serve the general public or the general good of the United States. It's all about money in their own pocket.
And that's why I use the word lucre, because that's what you're doing. You're doing it for personal gain, and then you have the Machiavellian that the end justifies the means.
Well, that certainly does not matter in this case, because I think the end of this war agenda is going to be the defeat and destruction of the United States of America. Bear, we're going to let you go here right now. I need to get back on and finish up what's going on over in Ukraine. There's an article over at rinf.com basically saying, the presidential election in Ukraine is a sham, and we've known that all along. All the candidates who were allowed to run for president were all from the junta. The ballots did not include any pro-separatist anti-Europe candidates. They didn't include any candidates that came up through any kind of a primary process to represent the people. It was simply the government that was installed by force saying, okay, these are all our buddies, you get to pick one. And it looks like even then they were cheating to hand it to this billionaire guy. By the way, we put some photos over at whatreallyhappened.com. Back when the elected government of Ukraine was kicked out, the media made a big deal about the very luxurious house the Ukrainian president lived in. Oh, see, he's rich on the backs of those poor Ukrainians. We have to get rid of him. And we coupled that with photos of the private residence of the new, soon-to-be confirmed Ukrainian president. It's even bigger, and it overtly looks like the White House. The guy just set himself up. I'm going to be it. I got enough money to make sure that it goes here. Now, even the Ukrainian World Congress is reporting there are violations in the Ukrainian election. Polls that were closed, people were taken off the voting rolls. Remember, we had that photo the other day of one of the official voting rolls that showed all these voters with the exact same residential address. The whole thing is completely fraudulent from top to bottom. But the Ukrainian World Congress came out and said, well, even though there are violations and problems, trust us, it didn't change the outcome, which is the same thing we hear in the United States of America. Every time they find another vote fraud, a rigged machine, people being kicked off the polls, we're always told, well, yeah, there was this problem, but trust us, it didn't change the outcome. Really, we would tell you if it changed the outcome. Of course, no, they wouldn't. Of course not. None dare call it vote fraud. Anyway. Let's see. Art off the grid. Aloha, Art. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. I'm probably going to get caught by the break, but I want to address two groups of individuals, those currently serving in the military and those who have never served. Mm-hmm. First, those who have never served. I've been hearing a lot of calls of some of you folks calling in, basically slandering those of us who have worn the uniform and currently wear the uniform.
Well, you're not hearing that on this show.
Not on your show, but on other shows. What you folks need to understand, you've never worn the uniform, so you really do not understand what those of us who have did go through. Now, fortunately, I never had to fire my weapon during my service. I never had to take a life. I'm thankful for that. Doesn't mean I haven't done serious bodily harm to people, but that was after I got out of the military. Not everyone, as you pointed out, Mike, not everyone who joins the military goes in because they're thinking that they're going to kill people. While we do know that roughly 10% of the military now comprises of former criminals, felons, gangbangers, stuff like this, these guys probably had some pretty sadistic motives in mind when they joined. But the vast majority, 90%, go in with very honorable intentions. And this is what you have to understand. Don't hate the warrior, hate the war. It's not their fault that they got caught up in this. They didn't know any better at the time. But they are waking up. Now, to those of you currently serving, those of you who know the truth and understand the truth, I hear the break.
Yeah, I'm afraid you're going to have to wrap it up.
Reach out to those who don't. Educate them. Wake them up. We've got to stop this before it goes any further.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I'm going to respond when we come back from the commercial break. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. Of course, over in Iran, the criminal banksters are now dangling at the end of a rope. All righty, now responding to Art off the grid, I'm absolutely in agreement that the veterans and serving military are not to blame for what is going on. It is the leadership, the military command and the civilian government over them who have decided on this agenda to go out and conquer the world to re-enslave them to the U.S. dollar. Now, knowing what we know today about government staged propaganda, I'm thinking back to the big stink that happened when our soldiers returning from Vietnam were at the airport and the so-called peaceniks were there to spit on them. And I have to tell you, looking back on that, that seemed like it was a propaganda operation to demonize the peace movement, just like that staged riot at Disneyland. And I don't think I buy that official story any longer, because I think most of us are aware enough to understand it isn't the serving soldiers, sailors, and airmen. These kids put on the uniform, they took an oath, they're doing what they promised to do. They have far more honor than the civilian government. that is ordering them into all these invasions for war. Now, Art Off the Grid also wanted me to talk about the law of armed conflict. This is a set of internationally recognized standards regulating military behavior. And if you go outside that law, you can be brought up on war crimes charges. Now, real hired mercenaries don't have to follow that. They can do whatever they want because they're not going to be reported in the news media. They're going to be supported and covered up by the governments that hire them. But regular serving military do have to follow the law of armed conflict. And by the way, it's in the Universal Code of Military Justice that serving military in the United States forces have a legal right to refuse any order that violates the law of armed conflict. If the colonel comes in and says, I want you to blow up that orphanage, the soldiers can say, no, we're not going to do that. There are no combatants in there. Remember Aaron Watada? And all the grief they poured on him, because the last thing they want is for the military to start thinking for themselves that, hey, what we're doing is morally wrong. It's a violation of the law of armed conflict. These are war crimes we're being told to commit. And they know from the Nuremberg trials, saying I was only following orders is not an excuse. It is the letter of the military law that if you are ordered to commit an act which is not in compliance with the law of armed conflict, you do have a right to refuse. Of course, they're going to whoop on you and kick you and shame you and call you a coward and everything to try and get you to do what they want you to do. But the veterans are most assuredly not to blame for what's been going on, and as a result, their maltreatment by the Veterans Administration, funded by your tax dollars, is all that more onerous. Now, getting back to Ukraine. Fighting has resumed in eastern Ukraine. Ukrainian warplanes and helicopters have attacked the Donetsk airport. And apparently along the way, the Ukrainian army has shelled the Slavyansk residential area. They're just shooting everybody, including civilian non-combatants. Apparently one of the shells almost hit a local teacher's college. Speaking of the law of armed conflict, along with painting their helicopters to look like they're from the United Nations. None of this stuff is legal. Now, Donetsk and Lugansk have now merged together to form a new autonomous nation called Novorossiya. So they're already forming their new government, and of course the junta in Kiev is out there absolutely dead set that they're going to reconquer those wealthy eastern part of Ukraine, because otherwise Russia's going to close relationships with eastern Ukraine, and Europe, for all the coup d'etat, is going to get the debt-stricken, unproductive western part of the country. Putin's got to be laughing his rear end off with this one. Speaking of Putin, article over at ericmargolis.com, the Great Western Gas Fiasco is talking about how Putin, who normally plays the poker face, he was on the verge of actually grinning over this deal with Russia and China now moving closer together and moving closer with Iran. And China is investing huge amounts of money in Russian industry. Russia's investing in China. They're moving incredibly close. They're forming an economic power block, which is going to be potent indeed, because both those nations have good, solid manufacturing foundations. Both those nations have good, solid agricultural output. Both of those nations have adequate domestic energy supplies. And this is the failure of the U.S. policy. Russia's out there making deals, while the U.S. is out there making war. And the U.S. is making war because nobody wants to make a deal with the United States anymore. We don't manufacture quality products anymore at an affordable price. It's all very expensive junk, and especially with our computer industry being kneecapped by the revelations about the NSA. Nobody wants to use U.S.-based computer services. Nobody wants to use U.S.-based cloud. Nobody wants to buy any computers or equipment that are coming through the United States of America because they are known to be backdoored. If you want to know a reason why the United States economy is in the Al-Qaeda, it is directly due to the federal government's policies since the crash of 2008. And all of those are policies dictated by that private central bank that wants to go on issuing all of the public currency as a loan at interest to make themselves rich and you poor. Now, there's a very alarming development. This is being reported over in alalam.ir. Jordan has just expelled the Syrian ambassador. Apparently, just gave him 24 hours to leave, declared him persona non grata. And they're kicking him out supposedly because he made statements that the government of Jordan doesn't agree with. Well, he is the Syrian ambassador. But I think there's more going on than that, because the timing of this ouster of the Syrian ambassador is very suspect, because it's coming right on the eve of this massive training exercise in Jordan involving 6,000 U.S. troops. It looks to me like the U.S. is planning or thinking about simply invading Syria before the Syrian elections can even happen. Because if Bashar al-Assad wins those elections, it completely destroys the U.S. rationale for intervening in Syria for the last 3 years. Of course, I already know what the U.S. government is going to say. Oh, Syria's elections, they're a complete fraud. They can't be trusted. You know, our elections are good and Syria's elections are bad and Ukraine's elections are good, even though the evidence of fraud is overwhelming. But this U.S. war agenda to force the world back to Bretton Woods, to force the world back to the petrodollar, it's already crumbling and failing. And this government can't admit error or reverse course. We already saw that with Obamacare and human-caused global warming. And they can't afford to lose any one of these invasions or overthrows, or it's the last. If the U.S. gets kicked out of Syria, if the U.S. gets kicked out of Libya, the American people are going to say, all right, we've gone along with this nonsense long enough. It's time to pull the plug. And pulling the plug will mean the money junkies aren't going to be able to afford being money junkies any longer, and they're going to be crying and throwing tantrums and saying, oh, I need another $1 billion, really. I need my fix. I'm breaking out in sweats, you know, because they're all addicts there to other people's money. Now, yesterday, Barack Obama paid a surprise visit to the troops in Afghanistan. And frankly, looking at the faces of those troops, they didn't look really all that happy to be there, and Obama actually kept them waiting in that tent for quite a while before he put on his appearance. And he made one statement there which I think did not make him any friends, and that is he declared the U.S. role in Afghanistan will extend beyond 2014. Hi, I'm the president, happy Memorial Day, and you're going to be stuck here long past when I said you were going to be stuck here. And, of course, this is another imperial edict because the United States does not have any kind of a treaty or understanding with the government of Afghanistan to stay past the end of 2014. Hamid Karzai won't sign it. Hamid Karzai wouldn't even show up to meet Obama. This is just more imperial arrogance, where the U.S. is going to say, we've decided we must stay in Afghanistan whether the government wants it or not. It's an echo of what John McCain was saying about Nigeria last week, that the U.S. has a right to intervene in Nigeria to find Boko Haram, whether the Nigerian government approves or not. So they're definitely out there, way off the edge of the Constitution. They can't declare wars for no reason at all. Certainly not without the permission of the United States Congress. Now, we're coming up on another commercial break. When we come back, major shift in the politics of Europe coming out of all these elections. And the news, I think, is good. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And before we get into the European elections here, I just linked to the front of whatreallyhappened.com this article called Who's Dangerous? It's from the trenchesworldreport.com, and it's a look back at an official Department of Homeland Security document from 2009, which lists military veterans who have fought in foreign wars and are disgruntled about the takeover of the United States as being extremely dangerous and a threat to national security. So there's another reason for the VA to be letting these guys die. They're seen as an enemy of U.S. government policies, even though they went out there and got crippled enforcing U.S. government policies. Now, that's got to be a real slap in the face of every veteran who served in combat to come back and discover the government that you gave so much for now has declared you as a dangerous extremist because you might not be happy about what happened to you. And worse, they're trying to simply declare all returning veterans as suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder justifying the removal of their Second Amendment right to keep and bear arms. And I've read that Bill of Rights. There are no qualifiers in it whatsoever. Now, getting on over to Europe, we're already dealing with the aftermath of the huge upset. Nigel Farage and his UKIP party just swept the elections. Looks like he could actually wind up as Britain's prime minister. Labour and the Tories are absolutely kneecapped at this point, and the issues of this election were to stop this flood of immigrants pouring into their country and to distance from the economic disaster of the European Union. And we saw the corporate media just, demonizing UKIP for being racists. How dare they not allow a flood of other people to come into Great Britain? At a time when the British people are no more able to find employment than the American people are. And how dare he not realize the inevitability of the ascendancy of the European Union? And I'm sure there was vote fraud over there, but it's the interesting thing about vote fraud. Vote fraud can shift an election by a few percentage points, but it can't reverse a landslide or it becomes too obvious. So they're very, very happy what happened there. Now, all across Europe during their EU elections, the Eurosceptics were winning. The countries that don't really like being part of the European Union, the parties that don't like being part of the European Union, scored huge victories. They're calling it the political earthquake. Down in Spain, the Catalonia Separatist Party won the EU vote in Spain. This is a major reversal of fortunes for the globalists and the New World Order plotters. We were all supposed to happily go along with their building of a one world government and a one world bank. But the crippling problem with the European Union is they had a built-in self-destruct device right from the very beginning called the European Central Bank. The National Front wins the European Parliament elections in France. This is a major reversal of fortunes for the EU and for those who want to form a one-world government. Greece's Golden Dawn won a seat in the EU Parliament. And, of course, the media's out there saying, this is the extreme far right. How dare they be nationalists? And remember, nationalists is the first half of National Socialists. They're just screaming like crazy that their agenda to forge a single planetary government and banking system has just been dealt a major, major setback. They don't know how they're going to recover from that one here. All righty, let's see. We're going to take some phone calls here. Kenny in Texas. Aloha, Kenny. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey there. Thanks for taking the call. I'm maybe not disagreeing with everything you're saying. I've got a little bit different slant. First, I'm going to make a statement. The statement is this. All wars are political and happen because of some group wanting to advance an agenda that involves resources and or money, you might call it. We could shorten that by saying all wars are political and about money and resources. That's what they all are.
Yes.
And they all, back through history, including now. It's happening now again, as it always does. You could even say World War II was about it, too. I'm not going to get into that one and argue that one, but we could go back as far as we want to go. But my point about, I understand that it's really hard to want to blame anyone who gets duped into thinking they ought to join the military, but my opinion is this. Yes, all of these military guys need to take responsibility for their actions. I'll say this. If no one was volunteering for these wars, we wouldn't be having them.
Well, that's kind of a naive statement. First of all, I get the impression that you've never read my article, All Wars Are Bankers' Wars, or you'd realize that I'm in agreement with you about the ultimate cause of all the wars. Second of all, these recruiters are lying to these kids about why they're joining and what they're going to be doing. And in many cases, and we've seen it right here in Hawaii, the government is deliberately crashing the economy so that young people have no option left but to join the military coming out of school. It's either join the military or be hungry and homeless on the street or stay living with your parents. And besides that, when military enlistment drops, the U.S. government already has a new draft bill sitting in committee in Congress ready to go the instant they think they can pass it without a huge public backlash.
Right, yeah, and in response to your statement earlier, yes, we do agree. I agree with most of everything you say. I just believe that folks need to take some responsibility. Yes, all of that you just said, I agree with. They're being lied to. They're being manipulated. The whole public is, and we can get it. We can take it all the way back to money and banking, because that's who in my personal opinion, I believe that the military of this country has become the strong arm of the government, which is really run by oligarchs and corporations. So, in essence, really, the military people are out there fighting wars to keep this false, corrupted economy going, which really should be done away with anyway. We really need to get rid of the entire sham and get back to substance, in my opinion. But hey, keep up the great work. No, I do agree with most of what you're saying.
All right. Well, thanks an awful lot. And I would recommend you look up a treatise called "War is a Racket" by Marine Corps Major General Smedley Butler, who basically lays out exactly what you're saying, that the U.S. military, regardless of what those kids in uniform are told about bringing democracy to the world, they really are enforcers for this organized crime system at the heart of our financial system. We're going to switch over to David in Boston. Aloha, David. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Oh, yeah. Aloha, Michael. The local chapter of Vietnam veterans, or not Vietnam, just plain Veterans for Peace, Michael, here in Boston is called the Smedley Butler chapter of the Veterans for Peace.
Okay.
So anyways, that book is highly recommended. The War is a Racket. Almost required reading. But anyways, hey, just quickly, Michael, I was going to bring up a certain case, but before I do, I was a taxi cab driver up in Anchorage, Alaska for almost like 20 years, like through the 80s and 90s.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the most common bumper stickers up in Anchorage, Michael, was here today and gone to Maui.
Yeah.
Yeah, because the folks up in Alaska and up in Anchorage, every chance they got during those long cold winters, they'd try to escape to Hawaii for a few days or a week or two. And I never went to Hawaii. It's the only state I haven't been to, but I used to drive around quite a few Hawaiians during the summertime. They'd come up to Alaska to visit Alaska in the summertime and everything. And, there's a close relationship, as you probably well know, between Alaska and Hawaii.
Well, they're two states who were made states in violation of the UN Charter. The plebiscites were fraudulent. And basically the option to become independent states was left off the ballot, as is required. Anyway, listen, we're coming up on the top of the hour, David. I'm afraid I'm going to have to cut you off because we've only got about a minute left here. When we come back at the top of the hour, we're going to be talking about this tragic shooting that took place out in California, or we are being told took place out in California. We also have another one in North Carolina. It looks like the gun grabbers are ramping up their campaign to simply go on killing more and more Americans until we all throw up our hands and say, oh, yes, please take our guns, make us safe, and so forth. So we're going to take a break here at the top of the hour, and when we come on back, we're going to be talking about this latest story out of California. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 2. Now, out in California, there has been a mass killing by a gentleman named Elliot Rogers, who's the son of an assistant director for the movie Hunger Games. So it's got celebrity zing and all the rest of that is going on as well. But the gun grabbers are already out there in full force. Screaming about, see, this proves we've got to have, guns banned. The father of one of the victims is out there crying on media saying it's the NRA's fault and so forth and so on. Now, here's what we know is going on. This kid, Elliot Rogers, was under treatment by no less than 3 mental health professionals who may not have even been coordinating among themselves regarding the treatment he was on. Now, at one point, he was on medications but had stopped taking them. And if you go over to ssristories.com, you will see that it is when you are withdrawing from these medications that you are at the highest risk of going crazy and harming others or yourself. But, of course, we're not going to see that anywhere on the corporate media because that might harm the profitability of the pharmaceutical industries. Remember back when Sandy Hook happened and there was a public interest group wanted to get the information about what medications Adam Lanza was on. And so they went through the Connecticut state equivalent of the Freedom of Information Act lawsuit. And we posted this video on whatreallyhappened.com where Patrick Quanashi, who was the attorney for the state's medical examiner's office, came in and argued against the release of that information, saying even if in this one case the medications were responsible for the shooting, that was not important information for the American people to know because it might discourage them from taking medications prescribed by their doctors. And if you look at how big pharmaceutical corporations are in Connecticut, you will understand this was all about the money. It is now estimated that 20 to 25% of Americans are now on some form of antidepressant. It's big, big business. And they want to protect it, just like they're protecting the genetically modified organism industry. Now, reading this guy's manifesto, it's obvious there's a problem building. And the big scandal here is apparently the police interviewed this guy a while back and came to the conclusion that he didn't represent a danger to anybody. Now that strikes me as very odd. Maybe those police were on prescription antidepressants. Now this is not entirely a gun crime. Half of the victims died of stab wounds. He actually had a higher successful kill ratio with the knife than with his gun. But they're trying to say, guns are bad. He had guns, he had ammunition. They're not talking about the fact that he was out there stabbing people. And again, if you go over to ssristories.com, you will see that people who are having their brains melted with these chemicals will use whatever's at hand. Baseball bats, hammers, hatchets, kitchen knives, whatever. It's not the tool, it is the person. And these medications are very dangerous. Now, there's a news story that's come out, and we linked to the video of that as well. Witnesses are saying there were two guys in the car during the shooting rampage. That's what's coming from the ground there, that one guy was driving, probably this Elliott guy, and there was a second person in the passenger seat that was leaning out the window doing the shooting. So already this is starting to look like another one of these ginned up mass shooting events to push the gun grabber agenda. By the way, 13 years ago, virtually the same thing happened at the Isla Vista campus, where the son of a Hollywood filmmaker went postal, killed 6, wounded a dozen before killing himself. And this is a classic pattern with these people who are having problems with these psychiatric medications. They'll just be feeling this growing anger and rage. They'll try and sublimate it into something that is nonviolent, like posting and video and writing and everything, but it reaches the breaking point. They go on out, commit a bunch of mass murders, and then they commit suicide because they can't live with what they just did. The pattern has repeated way too many times. There is a problem with these medications. And nobody wants to talk about it because, hey, as long as they're making money and paying taxes, it's legal to sell to the American people. By the way, we just put up another video, a documentary called The Hidden Enemy, Psychiatry. And one of the points that it makes is that the psychiatric establishment, the pharmaceutical corporations, are using our U.S. troops as guinea pigs to test these new medications. And no wonder they're getting messed up. No wonder we're losing more of our kids in the war zone to suicide than to enemy action. It's just completely out of control. It's all about the money. And the lives of ordinary citizens, well, that's just a cost of doing business. We're making progress here. Just look at our stock performance. I'm sorry, stock performance should not be the only measure of the success of a company. How many people you inadvertently kill or cripple has to be a factor. How much good your product actually does has to be a factor. And it isn't, not anymore, not in the United States of America. Now, about a week ago, there was a video that surfaced, and it was sent to me about 100 times, which in and of itself was suspicious. that was a video showing Mariel Hemingway and Ed Begley in a meeting with what was supposed to be a Mideast oil man, representative of Mideastern oil interests, offering them money to not do any more anti-fracking movies or documentaries or commercials. Because Mariel and Ed Begley are very much concerned about the costs of fracking. It's provably toxic, harmful, triggering earthquakes, and now we're finding out they can't even get the oil and gas out they thought they were going to get. And when I saw the video, the first thing I said, this feels like a setup and a trap, and it turns out it was. Mariel Hemingway has gone public saying they were invited to a meeting supposedly to discuss funding for an anti-fracking documentary. And they were in there videotaped, and the videotape was edited to make it look like they were open to the idea of accepting money from Middle Eastern oil interests to cancel their anti-fracking plans. And the whole thing is a hoax. It is a fraud. Okay? Guy by the name of O'Keefe, James O'Keefe, he's got a track record of using deception and hidden cameras to discredit liberal targets. And this whole video was created to portray anti-frackers as working for Mideast oil companies or willing to accept money from Mideast oil companies to sell out their principles. Now, Matt Damon did this wonderful movie called Promised Land. And if you have not seen it, make a point of looking at it. Because in there, I'm not going to give the storyline away here, but it basically shows the extremely deceptive depths the fracking industry will descend to get its agenda passed. And I know when the movie first came out, a lot of people said, oh, the fracking people, they wouldn't do that. They're not that dirty. But this stunt by O'Keefe confirms that, yeah, they are that dirty. They will play whatever dirty trick it takes to get what they want. So this stunt by James O'Keefe has vindicated the view of the fracking companies put out in Promised Land. I'd love to get Matt Damon on the show if I could. But remember, all public relations and spin doctoring is accepting money to lie and deceive the American people. And it's big business in this country. When I was a kid, lying used to be something that was bad and wrong to do, and now it's a career in this country. What do you do for a living? I lie to the American people, and I'm making big bucks while doing it. Needless to say, fracking support continues to decline in Great Britain and the United States of America. We're going to take a break for commercials, and we will be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Getting back to the economy here, the retail death rattle grows louder. And before I get into this, a reminder that prior to the crash of 2008, 60% of the United States economy was consumer spending. Now, the remaining 40%, much of that is financial services. Financial services account for 25% of the profitability of Wall Street. Moving the money around, charging interest on it, frauds, scams, mortgage-backed security fraud, all of that stuff. Now, if 60% of the economy is in consumerism and that collapses, you can't run the entire nation on the money junkies are making because they will not share it. So now we're looking here at what is being called Retail-mageddon. This is a complete list of the U.S. retailers closing stores, going bankrupt, going out of business in 2014. This is over at theburningplatform.com. I'm just going to read you a few from the top. Radio Shack is closing 1,100 stores. Family Dollar closing 370 stores. Coldwater Creek closing 365 stores. Dots closing 360 stores. Blockbuster closing 300 stores. Sears closing 300 stores. Staples closing 225 stores, extending through the end of next year. And it just goes on down. The Barnes & Noble, Abercrombie & Fitch, Rent-A-Center, GameStop, Blockbuster UK, Walgreens, McDonald's. It's all falling apart. There is no economic recovery. That 0.1% growth in the GDP that was announced for the first quarter of 2014 is no more trustworthy and reliable than the U.S. government's unemployment numbers. We are still in the recession that began in 2008. There is no recovery. There never has been. All there has been is constant reassurances from that same government that assured you Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction, that the economy is doing great, it's on the rebound. Look how well the rich people are doing, and if you're not doing well, it's your own fault. That's what we keep getting from the U.S. government. The hardship is all your fault. No, it isn't. You didn't do anything to deserve what you're having to suffer through right now. It was done to you. You are being staked out on the ground as prey for the money junkies with the blessing and connivance of the U.S. federal government. Over at the Internal Revenue Service, they've come out with a new ruling that employers are not allowed to dump their workers into the health care exchanges. Some employers were simply going to hand some tax-free contributions to the workers and say, go purchase your health insurance through the exchanges. This is over in the New York Times. And the IRS is saying, no, you can't do that. Now, why is the IRS making rulings? It is, after all, a private corporation owned by another private corporation called the Federal Reserve System. These are not really government agencies. We have Alan Greenspan, the former chairman of the Federal Reserve, on video saying that the Federal Reserve System answers to no government authority. They are above the law. A government unto themselves here. The conflict over land ownership is continuing to escalate. Out in South Dakota, there's a group of South Dakota ranchers are getting ready to sue the state of South Dakota over the fact that officials have banned them from driving across a scenic trail that is on their own land. This is not public land. This is not BLM land. This is their own ranch land. They own it. And the state is saying you can't drive on these roads. It's harmful to nature, and you can't do that. And, of course, without being able to drive vehicles across the roads on their own land, it's crippling their ranching operations, which is the real goal. Even as the USDA is out there screaming that beef prices are going to be soaring, the agenda out west is to drive the cattle ranchers out of business, the private cattle ranchers out of business, so we become dependent on the giant meat corporations to eat. Because once we're dependent on those giant corporations, we won't dare stand up and fight against them because we have to go to them for our food. Dependency is slavery. King George III tried to do it to the American colonials. That led to the Revolution. And our government is now trying to do it to us because they are afraid of us. They're afraid that we now see through all the lies and fraud and deception, and we're getting very unhappy. So they're trying to set things up so that even though we know the government is crooked and corrupt, we won't say anything because we're dependent on them for beef, for water, for electricity, for food stamps. They're desperate to just so crush down the economy that we're all dependent on government and corporate generosity just to live so that we won't dare complain anymore. Now, is that the kind of life you want to live? More importantly, is it the kind of life you want to sentence your children to live? I think the answer there is no. Another article over at newswithviews.com re-asking the question, does the Constitution permit the federal government to own land? And the answer is unequivocally no. Article 1, Section 8, Clause 17 of the United States Constitution allows the federal government to control Washington, D.C. and land underneath military bases and federal buildings. Nowhere in the Constitution is the government allowed to own millions of acres of public land. That public land is the property of the states and of you, the people. We know why the government is doing it. Part of it is they want to take these public lands and then privatize them for their political cronies, like Harry Reid's doing out there in Nevada, where his son is working for this Chinese energy company, and they need a huge block of land that belongs to the people. Well, not anymore. And the other reason, and this goes all the way back to when Richard Nixon ended gold convertibility of the Federal Reserve note, the U.S. government is taking your public lands to pledge as collateral on all of their borrowing. And when this government and economic system collapses, there are going to be a lot of foreign governments coming in saying, we own all this land. It was pledged as collateral on government borrowing. And we, the people, have to be ready to stand up and say, no, the federal government did not have the legal authority to take our land and pledge it as collateral on their borrowing. And if you fail to do the due diligence on the U.S. law and the Constitution, then you are just out of luck. If you want your money back, go to those politicians. They've all retired down to the Cayman Islands, and I'm sure you can get them and get your money back from them. But the pledging of public lands as collateral on U.S. government debt is illegal and unconstitutional, and we, the American people, have absolutely no reason to go along with that. None whatsoever. As I mentioned before, the U.S. government is definitely afraid of the American people right now. There's a story out of Investment Watch blog, and it's talking about a video put up by Ted Cruz, where the U.S. Senate is talking about proposing a new constitutional amendment to modify and partly repeal the First Amendment in the Bill of Rights. And this new version they want to put out there completely removes the protection of and equality of all religions, and it grants and ensures freedom of speech only to the corporate media. Good luck getting 3/4 of the states to ratify this one. Of course, they may simply lie about ratification like they did with the 16th Amendment in order to pass a personal income tax on you. They did. They lied about the ratification of the 16th Amendment. Nobody can actually prove it succeeded in ratification. And we have Judge James C. Fox in Sullivan versus United States. He states right in the court record that on examination, the 16th Amendment failed ratification. They just lied to you about it, like they've lied about everything else. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. Another alarming story, and one that indicates the extreme fear the U.S. government now has of the independent media and the Internet. Senator Edward John Markey, Democrat from Massachusetts, appears to be pursuing a plan to undermine free speech on the Internet using this flimsy, worn-out hate crimes pretense. He has introduced a bill, Hate Crime Reporting Act of 2014, Senate 2219, would empower the National Telecommunications and Information Administration to keep tabs on any Internet, radio, or television content that allegedly advocates or encourages so-called hate crimes. Now, the problem with that is hate crimes is a very fuzzy, fluffy definition that can be construed to cover a lot of different topics. We already know that criticism of Israel has been declared a hate crime, hate speech. In fact, telling the truth in an age of lies is considered hate speech. Expressing doubts about the official story on anything is hate speech. So they're trying to find some way they can convince the American people to go back to being dependent on the corporate news media and government proclamations for their view of the world. Now, you remember when the movie The Matrix came out? And it was a huge success, and I think because most people realized it was a metaphor for our current lives. Now, we're not plugged directly into computers, but we are spending most of our perceptual experience on our computer screens, TV screens, tablets, smartphones. 90% of our view of the world is being fed to us through these portable electronic devices by way of corporations with vested interests in filtering and controlling what we're seeing. So in that context, we're already very much along the path to that matrix world where we're living with this carefully crafted illusion to turn us into being useful slaves and useful breeders of workers and useful soldiers. But all of this indicates a government that has become very much afraid of the American people. Now, common sense would say, and the old homily about when governments fear the people, you have freedom, you would think the government would back off, but they can't. Because the government is now hopelessly enslaved to the private central bankers who are saying you will go on forcing the world back onto the U.S. dollar. There's no turning back, no matter how bad it gets, because these money junkies will gladly trade 1 billion human lives for more gold in their pocket. And it's a very, very dangerous situation. So they're trying to find some way that they can suspend freedom of speech and expression in the United States of America, whether online or off. That is the sum of these two different approaches that we're seeing, where they're talking about literally revising the First Amendment so that only corporate media is granted freedom of speech. That is absolutely not what the Founding Fathers intended. We're going to grab a phone call here. Chad in Alaska. Aloha, Chad. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi. The federal government gets its land through whatever means, whether it's war or treaty or whatever, and then it cedes a certain amount of land to a state government to control, and it puts it under that state's jurisdiction. And that's not the entire boundaries of the state. That's just a specific amount of land that the federal government cedes to the state.
Now, wait a minute. You've got it backwards. The federal government can't cede to the state land that already belongs to the state.
No, it never belongs to the states. States are created through the Ordinance of the Northwest Territory.
No, states have been created through a wide variety of means, not all of them legal.
No, they're all created through the Ordinance of the Northwest Territory.
The Ordinance of the Northwest Territory certainly was not invoked to create the state of Hawaii, so I'm not sure where you're coming from, but we're going to let you go here. No, as a matter of fact, the original 13 colonies just said we're states. There was no Northwest Territory ordinance there. Texas was simply annexed by the U.S. Congress and said, okay, you're now a state. And even the U.S. Supreme Court ruled after the fact that Congress didn't have that authority, but they kept on hanging on to the state here. We have a public law signed by President Bill Clinton apologizing for the illegal annexation of Hawaii. But we're going to keep Hawaii as a state. They're not following their own laws. They're absolutely not following their own laws. The Constitution limits the land the federal government can own and control for the very reason that the Founding Fathers did not want a central government simply confiscating or collecting all the land and then selling it to settle their debts, which is exactly what has happened. New report out of China says the National Security Agency is collecting 5 billion phone calls every single day. And they're now admitting that some of them, meaning all of them, are being recorded. Because remember when that data center in Utah came online, we did a little calculation. Based on the advertised capacity of that storage facility, we determined that it could hold a recording of every single voice phone call made by every single human on planet Earth for the last 7 years. They're getting it all. They're taking it all. And, of course, their excuse now is, well, it really isn't surveillance until somebody actually uses the information. That's nonsense. That's like a burglar coming into your home and stealing your jewelry but saying it isn't really theft until I pawn it or trade it for drugs. It's weasel wording by a government that absolutely does not want to follow the Constitution and the Bill of Rights any longer. Now, as you know, they just recently opened the new 9/11 museum to enshrine the official story that nobody believes in anymore. Apparently, when they were having the dedication, the 9/11 first responders who had been invited to be there were told they could not come in because they had so many wealthy donors coming in for the dinner that they obviously had to get first seating. Talk about a slap in the face here. Up in Ottawa, Canada, they have a very interesting law regarding ad campaigns costing over $1 million for the government. And these campaigns have to be followed by a survey of whether the ad campaigns are working, effective, whether the Canadian people agree with it or disagree with it. And more recently, Canada's governmental advertising budget has been for ads promoting Canada's government rather than government programs for the benefit of the Canadian people. And because they've been getting very negative reviews on these ad campaigns saying, we're the government and we're really swell, they've now removed most of the questions from these surveys because they don't want to hear the answers anymore. Over in Great Britain, there's another big stink. The Education Secretary, Michael Gove, has now ordered the removal of classic literature from the British school curriculum. We're seeing the same thing here in the United States of America under Common Core, where the classics of literature are being taken out of the reading curriculum and replaced with government reports on things like human-caused global warming. They're really trying to dumb down the children so they can't figure out what's going on, what's being done to them. Story coming out of Global Research, Israel is now considering the complete annexation of the West Bank territories. Now, in theory, if this happens, it's a violation of international law. Remember, back when Ukraine, the territorial boundaries must be preserved at all costs. So if Israel goes ahead and simply annexes the West Bank territories, it's going to be seen as no different from Russia's accession of Crimea that was being demonized by the American media. What will the U.S. government do? They won't do a thing. They won't say a thing. They'll say, oh, it was necessary in this case, and they'll go on sending your tax money to Israel here. Now, the Pope is just wrapping up his visit in Israel, and thank goodness nobody took a shot at him. I was very worried about that. He had one unscheduled stop. He went over to visit one of the separation walls between Israel and Palestine, and he prayed fervently, his head against the concrete, that this wall would come down. Unfortunately, today, the wall is still standing, which I think means the Pope doesn't really have all the authority and juice we were told that he does. His prayer did absolutely nothing of any real value. Meanwhile, up in Ottawa, again, the Israeli embassy is very upset over an art exhibit at the Ottawa City Hall. Now, this is a display of photography, and the photographer basically says this is her memories of living as a Palestinian under Israeli occupation. And it's supposed to portray the brutality of the war and occupation. And Israel's ambassador to Canada is saying, no, you're glorifying terrorists. You're glorifying, people who commit murder and violence against the Israelis. And my prediction is Canada will bow to Tel Aviv and take the exhibit down. You're not allowed to see anything that portrays the world from any other point of view than Israel. Okay, we're going to take a break for commercials. We'll be back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're coming up on the top of the hour, and Lady Claire joining us here. Now, Turkey and Israel have finally agreed on reparations from Israel, meaning from your taxes, to Turkey for the attack on the Mavi Marmara, the humanitarian aid flotilla that was attacked by the IDF, resulting in several deaths, including an American from New York. That has not, however, stopped Turkey from, or the Turkish courts rather, from issuing arrest warrants to Israeli ex-generals who were responsible for the attack on the Gaza flotilla. And that means that basically if those generals enter Turkey or any country with which Turkey has an extradition treaty, they can be arrested. And Turkey has now requested Interpol to arrest these generals. Of course, the Israeli media is out there screaming today about how Turkey is just a haven for anti-Semitism, and really that's only their hatred of the Jewish people and of Israel where they're still talking about the Mavi Marmara after all these years, just like it's only the anti-Semites in the United States who still talk about the USS Liberty. Boy, I get tired of the whining from those people. I really, really do here. Financial Times is reporting that China is now accusing major U.S. consulting firms of spying on them. This is in response to the U.S. Justice Department's decision to charge Chinese government officials with spying. So now the spying accusations are hurling back and forth. And again, we understand there is a certain degree of spying going on in the modern world. Government spying on each other, military spying on each other. The offense of the NSA is spying on law-abiding Americans not suspected of any criminal or terroristic activity. Without warrants, all of it a violation of the Constitution. And we're finding out more and more that all of this huge spy system isn't even really focused on real criminals or terrorists or even that much on foreign governments. We already proved with our NSA challenge, and by the way, the sixth one is now underway. Real terrorists and real criminals can defeat the NSA cryptographers. certainly long enough to carry out their nefarious plans, it's actually not that difficult. The only reason the NSA can read all of your communications is that you foolishly are using off-the-shelf approved encryption systems, meaning the NSA already has the method if they haven't outright backdoored it. They're watching you because they're afraid of you. They're afraid that you are now awake and realize the true nature of this government and the evils that it has perpetrated across the globe. Story coming out of RINF.com. Records are showing that these fusion centers across the United States that were supposed to be watching out for criminals were spending most of their time monitoring the Occupy protests on a day-by-day basis, monitoring dissidents. I'm sure they're paying attention to me, as boring as that might actually turn out. And there's another story, and this came out of Blacklisted News. The Obama administration has spent a fortune using these fusion centers in the NSA to monitor the Occupy protests, flash mobs, even yoga classes. Millions of dollars, your tax dollars, being spent when our economy cannot support it, to keep track of benign activities authorities linked to the protests, meaning they're trying to do 6 degrees of separation. If you're a protester at the Occupy Wall Street movement and you have a knitting class, well, then we've got to monitor the knitting class. That's how absurd it is. Vast sums of money. Meanwhile, our roads continue to crumble. We're not taking care of our veterans. Sorry, we can't pay for the operation. We've got to monitor those protesting Americans. They're a danger. In fact, you as a returning veteran are a danger. Do you realize how paranoid the federal government is sounding these days? Everybody's a threat. They're all out to get us. Not too long ago, we had this list of 76 different categories of Americans now viewed as potential domestic terrorists by the U.S. federal government. It's such a broad-ranging list. It covers 99% of the American people. Meanwhile, 4 Orthodox Jewish rabbis have been charged in New Jersey with kidnapping Jewish men and forcing them to divorce their unhappy wives. This is a federal court trial. If convicted, the rabbis could face life imprisonment and a $250,000 fine for each kidnapping charge. And just to show that I'm not picking on the rabbis, apparently over at the Vatican, the head of the Jesuits, Adolfo Pachon, has suddenly decided to resign from his top Vatican office. And apparently this is in response to his standing trial in absentia for crimes against humanity. That's going to put more pressure on Pope Francis. Meanwhile, over at NASA, which means never a straight answer, they are suffering the effects of this wartime economy. Their budget continues to be cut. They're talking about needing to shut down Curiosity next year. And now they're talking that because of lack of funding, they may have to shut down the Spitzer Space Telescope. Now, we're not talking the Hubble, which has already had its full expected lifetime of all of these amazing discoveries that it's made. We're talking about the Spitzer. This was launched in 2003. It's an infrared telescope, and it's also supplying amazing, amazing stuff. Now, it's liquid nitrogen used to cool the detectors ran out in 2009, so it's lost functionality of 2 of its 3 key instruments. Of course, we don't have a space shuttle anymore to go up and put more liquid nitrogen in there. And now it looks like they just don't have the funds to sit there at the dashboards and run it anymore. And I've talked about this before. I remember back in the 1960s. And the 1960s were a time of turmoil. There was Vietnam, the protests, all the assassinations that were taking place. But through it all, Americans still had that space program that they could look at with pride and still feel good that America stood for something positive. We don't have that anymore. Obama is the first president since Eisenhower to preside over a nation without a manned space program. And now our unmanned program is being allowed to wither on the vine. Now, as you know, today is Memorial Day. There is still ice on Lake Superior. even as they're still screaming about human-caused global warming here. So far, it is the coldest year on record for Maryland. It's 12 degrees centigrade colder than it was in 1921. The Antarctic sea ice area has been above normal every day for the past 30 months. But they're still out there pushing human-caused global warming, carbon tax, the world is burning up, it's all your fault. Apparently, Secretary of State John Kerry was giving a speech down in Mexico, screaming that temperatures in Europe and in Vietnam were unprecedented and broke every record that's ever been made. And apparently, the temperatures he claimed in his speech were completely wrong. Just made them up out of thin air. Now, remember the other day we were talking about this claim of a record temperature over at the Tulsa airport. Now, first of all, the airport is not a good place to be taking temperature measurements because it's surrounded by airplanes burning tons of JP1 kerosene and avgas and huge 100-degree exhaust blowing all over the place. But for some reason, they decided that this temperature measuring station in the middle of the runway, surrounded by all those heat-producing engines, represents a trend that proves human-caused global warming. Apparently, the blogger that exposed the 97% consensus fraud has now received threats on his life. It's not science. It's politics. They want to guilt you out of carbon taxes. They want you to get you to buy carbon credits because it's going to make them rich and you poorer. And the reality is that Earth's climate has always been changing from forces that human technology cannot even begin to control. This is just another scam to get your money and obedience. Got to take a break for top of the hour. We'll be back with the Lady Claire after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show, hour number 3. And for those of you watching on BAM User TV, the gorgeous creature sitting behind me is the lovely Lady Claire, who just because it was a holiday day decided she was going to come on in and join us in the third hour. So, aloha. Welcome to our little Claire Twofer. I need to adjust your microphone a bit.
Thank you.
And what is the first thing you want to talk about?
Well, the first thing that I want to talk about is the way that the Israeli government constantly uses fear and fear-mongering techniques to terrorize their own people. I really feel sorry for the people of Israel.
Well, it's not like our government isn't doing exactly the same to us.
But here's what happened. On Saturday, the IDF spokesperson posted on its Twitter account a supposed image of some of the 100,000 missiles Hezbollah has aimed at Israeli cities. But there are a couple of problems with it. The missiles shown are not found in Lebanon or even in Syria. And the photo, which appeared to be from AFP Getty Images, was used on an IDF spokesperson tweet marking 14 years since the army withdrew from Lebanon. And then it goes on to say, hashtag, Hezbollah terrorists have rearmed with 100,000 missiles pointed at Israel.
100,000 missiles.
Yes, 100,000 missiles.
Boy, I've told those Israelis a million, billion, trillion times, do not exaggerate.
Yes,
right.
I know. However, the tweet did not mention that the photo is for illustrative person only and was actually from a war memorial in South Korea.
Now, I'm pretty sure those rockets they put up by the war memorials aren't really operational.
No.
You know, when I've seen a lot of artillery pieces around war memorials, and they're definitely disabled.
Yeah.
You know, we have some down here in Honolulu.
But I find it just abso-flipping-lutely unbelievable that the IDF thought that they could get away with using a photo like that in this part of the 21st century. What were they thinking?
Well, what they're thinking is that anybody who points out those are not Hezbollah missiles, they're South Korean, they're just going to scream, oh, you're an anti-Semite, and then that'll shut us up. Not going to work.
No, and I do want to thank Haaretz for having had the sand to post this and make sure that people could see it online, that it was a fake. And I'd also like to talk about Israel in another context. Apparently, the House has just approved another $600 million to Israel for its military aid.
Another $600 million.
Another $600 million for missile defense subsidies. Now, Israel has several missile defense systems, which, by and large, the IDF doesn't believe to be very effective. And it's very bizarre. When programs get defunded by Israel's own government, the U.S. seems very anxious to bankroll them.
Well, yeah. I mean, it's just that giant sucking sound on our wallets coming over from Tel Aviv.
Yeah, and the subsidies are part of the qualitative military edge policy, which U.S. hawks have reiterated in the latest military spending bill as a pledge to take all necessary steps to ensure that Israel possesses and maintains an independent capability to remove existential threats to its security.
Well, you realize this is part of the scam, because the United States will say we must give Israel a qualitative edge in weapons, and so we'll give them money and new weapons, which Israel will then turn around and sell to their neighbors.
Yeah.
Then Israel comes back to the U.S. and says, look, they got the same weapons that we do. Where's our qualitative edge? So the U.S. government sends them more money and more advanced weapons, which Israel then turns around and sells to their neighbors around the area.
And having done this, Mike, I have come to the conclusion that the U.S. House of Representatives has officially lost its collective mind on this. And
no, what they did is they sold their souls in exchange for AIPAC campaign funding.
Yep.
And we all know it now. It's another reason why Israel's out there screaming. And by the way, this issue about Lebanese missiles, the reason they're pushing that is Israel once again wants to invade Lebanon. They're trying to find a reason to sell this idea that it's absolutely necessary to invade Lebanon. They made us do it, Mommy. Lebanon's being the bad people again, because Israel wants that Litani River. They want that water to come on down to Israel, to Tel Aviv, and to all of the cities in Israel that want more water, and they're willing to basically go out and conquer it. That was the objective of the last Lebanon war, but they couldn't get to it. Right now, the current border between Lebanon and Israel is only 20 miles away from that Litani River, and that is what Israel is after.
And the Lebanese government is in a world of hurt right now because they're in a power vacuum because a new president hasn't been yet selected.
They have not been able to get a quorum in their parliament.
Yeah.
So this would be a very good time for Israel to attack. And I would speculate that if, in fact, this training exercise in Jordan is really a prelude to a U.S. invasion of Syria, that under the cover of that, Israel will move into Lebanon.
I would say that that is a real definite possibility. And remember, these exercises do not end until June 8th, which is 2 days after the date the Syrian election is supposed to start.
Right. And, of course, Jordan kicked out the Syrian ambassador. Syria has now kicked out the Jordan envoy in a tit for tat. So they're ramping up here for something.
It's a prelude to war.
It's a prelude for something really ugly to happen in Syria, because if Bashar al-Assad wins that election in Syria, it totally undermines the entire U.S. justification for having funded these mercenaries in Syria for the last 3 years, killing people, chemical weapons, destruction of infrastructure and private property, because we're supposed to be liberating the Syrian people from the evil Bashar al-Assad.
Right.
And if he wins the election, that whole idea is going to be gone. So we're either looking at an outright invasion by the U.S. into Syria under some pretext, some big bang somewhere, or if Bashar al-Assad wins the election, there'll probably either be an assassination attempt on him or a decapitation strike, meaning the drones and cruise missiles go in and blow up whatever building they think he happens to be in at the moment.
Killing everyone who's there.
That's right.
I'd also like to look at Syria for a couple of other stories, if you don't mind. Apparently, the Washington Post seeks U.S. patrolled so-called safe zone in Syria. The Washington Post editors have made another strident appeal to Obama to abandon his passivity and do something to help rebels in Syria, complaining that they are still receiving far too little help from the U.S., and stating that the U.S., this administration, must undertake an R2P, responsibility to protect, by violating the sovereignty of Syria and breaking international law through military action inside Syria's borders to establish a patrol of a safe zone for the rebels.
Well, see, here's the thing. This whole idea of responsibility to protect, that's just another one of these cover stories for U.S. invasions and conquests of countries that refuse to sell their resources only for the U.S. dollar, refuse the blessings of private central banking. Mm-hmm. The U.S. does not have a responsibility to protect anybody but U.S. citizens inside the United States of America, and they're doing a very poor job of that.
Lousy job. And you know something with these op-eds, there are a couple of things that I would almost be willing to bet on. A, none of these editors have any family serving in the U.S. military. And B, if they were going to do full disclosure, may have a lot of stocks in the military-industrial complex.
Or they're probably just getting, under-the-counter encouragements from the war hawks and certainly from AIPAC.
Oh, yeah.
Or with all of this NSA spying on everybody, their personal secrets may have been discovered and are simply being used to blackmail them. Because blackmailing somebody to go along with your agenda is a lot less expensive than actually bribing them to do it.
Yeah, I hear you. And another story about Syria that I wanted to cover. Syria war victims and refugees with cancer are being denied treatment due to lack of funds by the UN. Millions have been driven from their homes, and a huge number have fled.
Can't they sign up for Obamacare?
I don't think so. I don't think so. And it's pretty awful. But I would like to point out that these people would not be war victims, refugees, or cancer sufferers who potentially won't get appropriate treatment if the U.S. government hadn't decided to fund and arm the Syrian opposition military in a desperate bid to create regime change in Syria to isolate and possibly invade Iran.
It is very, very ugly, all that has been done under the banner of the Stars and Stripes.
Yeah.
And again, getting back to the fact that this is, well, we have to take a break for commercials. I have a comment about this when we come back.
Gotcha.
Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And, of course, today is Memorial Day, and President Obama was out there in the seem to have some excess noise here. President Obama was out there at Arlington laying a wreath at the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier. Basically, it's a sales pitch. It's a sales pitch to the young people of America that if you join the military and you get killed, we will remember you forever. Well, they certainly don't remember who's inside that Tomb of the Unknowns. And we're seeing all over the TV networks all these movies that portray war as grand and glorious. I noticed that Oliver Stone's Platoon and Stanley Kubrick's Full Metal Jacket didn't make the cut for movies to see today. But again, we do owe these veterans a debt of honor that we take care of them. Now, the government has basically lied to you because they're taking your tax dollars and saying, we will take this money and we will care for the veterans, and it turns out that's not happening. We don't know where the money is going, but it's not going to care for the veterans. They're being put on a waiting list and just wait until you die. Save some money. The money we need the money to buy hollow point bullets to threaten the American people with. That's where that money went on.
Yeah, the Department of Agriculture.
Yeah,
buying bullets. Hello.
It's just again, the signs are there. This government is now absolutely terrified of the American people, and they're preparing to wage war on the American people and the 50 states. In other words, they're preparing to fight the last war. And that is why I keep saying standing up and initiating violence against the government is the wrong thing to do. That's what they're waiting for. That's what they're prepared to deal with. What they can't deal with is 300 million Americans proclaiming to the rest of the world, I don't recognize that government in Washington, D.C. is legitimate. It certainly is not constitutional. And I will not obey its dictates. I will not fight and die in its wars. I will not pay its bills any longer. And when 300 million Americans stand up and do that, the party is definitely over. All right, we're going to grab a real quick phone call here. Wes in Idaho. Aloha, Wes. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Wow, that was quick. Hello, Michael. Freedom. Any boundaries? Purpose of law. Sympathy for the devil. I want to know how or where Michael Rivero stands on this thing of a proposed statue of Satan in the Oklahoma Capitol. Is that freedom of religion and speech?
I not only think it's freedom of religion, I think it's highly appropriate. We should have a statue of Satan in front of every single one of our government buildings right now. So thank you very much here. And what is your next topic of discussion, Claire?
Well, it appears that there has been growing violence in the country of Yemen. And that is really, really intensifying. And, you know, the late President Kennedy said it best: when peaceful revolution is impossible, violent revolution is inevitable. And we are seeing this playing out very painfully, clearly, in Yemen. Now, the United States government enabled and supported the former dictator, alleged President Salah, for well over 33 years. He yielded power on February 27th, 2012, and was replaced by President Mansour Hadi. And very interesting, on the Yemenite ballot, Hadi's name was the only one on the ballot. So it was very clear.
That must have been terrible for the bookmakers trying to run bets on who was going to win that election, you know.
And but the terrible thing for the Yemenite people is that nothing has changed for the positive. The corruption, the grinding poverty, the illiteracy are still the order of the day.
Well, we saw the same thing in Ukraine. The only names that were on the ballot were the people who were part of the junta.
Yeah.
And no other candidates were. We saw that here in 2008 and 2012 when Ron Paul, who had more grassroots support than any other candidate, was simply excluded from running through the machinations of the corporate media and the party apparatchiks.
And when a person doesn't have much left but his life, and even that doesn't appear to be worth much, there is a point where radicalism starts to become attractive, when things do not change for the better. And so I was sort of asking myself how the U.S. government could change things on the ground rather than raining hot, flaming death on innocent civilians through drone strikes.
Oh, but raining death on innocent civilians is what the United States does best, so we're going to keep on.
No, not so much.
You know, again, what we need is a United States government that is going to take care of the United States and stop going around the world intruding into other countries to loot their wealth, to pay the unpayable debt created by the Federal Reserve. I mean, it is absolutely established there is a link between private central banking and the eventuality of wars of conquest to try and deal with the debt that's created by this pyramid system. There is no way to run a private central bank that loans the public currency at interest that doesn't lead to massive debt and eventual war to try and deal with that debt. They came in together. Before the creation of the Federal Reserve, there was no such thing as a world war, and we're into number 3 right now.
Yeah. I mean, there are things that the U.S. government could do. It could engineer a humanitarian food medicine project with a very transparent accounting to give the government's cronies no chance to get this food and medicine and sell it on the black market. It could encourage a public-private investment partnership with wealthy Gulf countries like Qatar and Saudi Arabia to build infrastructure, roads, schools, and hospitals.
I don't think Saudi Arabia needs much of that. I mean, they're a very wealthy nation.
No. What I'm saying is maybe we could get some partnership with the wealthier countries like Saudi Arabia for Yemen.
I misunderstood.
Yeah.
Well, that technically is the province of the United Nations to be doing.
Yeah.
But right now, our government is wholly dedicated to re-enslaving the world to Bretton Woods and the petrodollar deal, and that is the motive behind all of these conquests and overthrows and coups d'etats that we've seen over the last 13 years. And again, we have seen how this government, as demonstrated both with Obamacare and human-caused global warming, they cannot admit error, they cannot change course, they cannot admit that they were wrong, and they will pursue this war policy even to the destruction of the United States of America.
Yeah, that's pretty awful. I'd sort of like to skip over to Asia right now, Thailand's coup. West predicts violent backlash. Now, the guy who used to run it but was convicted in absentia and was still running it through his sister before she got kicked out by the military coup, Thaksin Shinawatra, the West and the U.S. are doing everything they can to prevent this coup from holding, because it's really a slap against this guy and his
U.S. backing.
Yeah, his U.S. backing.
The U.S. has already cut all foreign aid to Thailand, and no doubt we'll start hearing we must invade Thailand. They're going to go on in there. And what Thailand illustrates, what Libya illustrates, is, and even Iraq and Afghanistan to a lesser extent, all of these nations conquered by the American empire, these provinces, are starting to break away faster than the U.S. can conquer or reconquer them. The American empire is falling apart, mirroring almost exactly the collapse of the Roman Empire, and for pretty much the same reason, accumulated unpayable debt.
Yeah, It's nasty. And the protesters have always been portrayed as, terrible people, and how could they not like the government? But the Thai people really want their country back, Mike.
That's really what it all comes down to.
Yeah.
The people of the world are waking up and realizing the true nature of their governments, and they've had enough. They've had enough. What started as the so-called Arab Spring is now a global spring, and yes, some of these movements are being hijacked for imperialistic purposes, but it's a general trend. The people all over the world are all of a sudden realizing the true nature of their government and financial system, and they've really had enough. I think it was a big shock to everybody that the Catalonia Independence Party won the Spanish EU elections. And that, in fact, all across Europe, where all these Eurosceptic, independents, pro-nationalist parties are just sweeping those elections, it is a sign that this whole idea of a global empire and global central banking is not supported by the people. And you cannot have a world where every single government is making war on their own people. That is simply not going to hold together.
No, definitely can't.
Okay, we got to take another break for commercials, and we will be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. And Claire, what is your next topic?
The next topic is something that should never happen in American policing, but seems to be happening more and more. Cops raid wrong home, shoot innocent woman cowering in her closet. Nassau County, New York police officers raided the wrong home and shot an innocent woman in the chest while she reportedly cowered in the closet, begging police not to shoot her. The police claim the officer who shot her with his assault rifle did so because the gun fired accidentally.
Oh, my God. Accidentally.
Accidentally. And rather than risk trial, police chose instead to absolve themselves of any responsibilities and loot taxpayers to pay the woman a $650,000 settlement. Police brutality has become an epidemic in this country. And
it really has. I mean, this idea that the assault rifle went off accidentally. Not since the scandal with Remington about 6 years ago have we seen guns that fire themselves. This is the height of absurdity. Now, what's really interesting is in the ADL's latest newsletter was a promotional message about how the ADL is now training U.S. law enforcement agencies. The Anti-Defamation League is bragging that it is training U.S. law enforcement agencies, and that goes a long way to explaining why the U.S. police are now treating American citizens the way the IDF treats the Palestinians. They're trying to turn the United States of America into another version of Israel where there are the privileged people, God's chosen, and everybody else just gets beat on and shot with impunity.
This is, I think, another manifestation of a war against the American people by governments at all levels. You see the good-paying jobs getting offshored, outsourced. You see people who are homeless being criminalized, and people who are trying to be a part of the solution getting fined and having judgments against them.
And criminalized. And smeared in the media. Very obviously, there is an agenda being pushed to create a two-tiered society in the United States of America where you have the rich money junkies in their gated, secure communities, and everybody else is just there to be preyed on, looted, sent off to fight in wars. And they are obviously dead set on enforcing that very un-American model for the United States of America. And the police brutality is completely and totally out of control. Again, at some point, the people are going to start fighting back. Indiana just passed a law that says if the police are trying to enter your home illegally, you can shoot them. And that is, of course, a state-level adoption of the United States Supreme Court, John Bad Elk versus United States, where the Supreme Court of the United States ruled that if the police are acting outside the law, you have a right to defend yourself and your property with up to and including lethal force. And I think more and more people are going to start doing that in the face of this obvious Israelification of the American police forces that are no longer about law enforcement and care for the community, but suppression and repression of ordinary Americans.
Yeah, absolutely. And, on this Memorial Day, I'd kind of like to make a little comment about war in general. I have found, and I just turned 65 a couple of weeks back, that as I age, I get more viscerally Quaker about war. Because for governments with a good moral character, there are always other ways to resolve geopolitical issues other than war. And the litmus test for me, Michael, is, will this actually make us safer? Will this enhance our freedoms? And I take a look back at these preemptive wars in Iraq and Afghanistan and the undeclared wars in places like Pakistan and Yemen, and I have a two-word answer for you. Heck no.
Well, you know, what we're seeing here is we're always raised by our schools, by TV, by whatever, to think that we're an advanced human civilization. But the reality is, although the technology is growing, and certainly we ordinary people are far better educated and have more resources available to us than in the past, our political leadership is operating on the same moral level and with the same desires as medieval warlords across Europe. It's all about whacking other people and taking their wealth, and it really does come down to that.
It's all for private profit.
It's all for private profit. Major General Smedley Butler laid it all out in War is a Racket. I've laid it all out in All Wars Are Bankers' Wars. That is what these kids who have been killed, whose memory that we honor today on Memorial Day, that's what they died for.
And also our vets who are desperately waiting for good care.
That's
and their families, because the families in their own way are also serving. I know several military wives who have kids in my church, and they are, they manage everything with a great deal of grace and courage, and keeping the kids sane when daddy comes home, keeping them sane when daddy deploys. It's a job in itself, It
is. It does affect all the families as well. And if we owe anything at all to these dead and crippled veterans, we owe them the honesty of acknowledging what it is they were killed and crippled for. And it wasn't democracy. It wasn't to save these people from an evil tyrant. It was all about banking. The clash of civilizations that you keep hearing in all of the war rhetoric is a war between banking systems, between private central banks issuing the public currencies alone at interest versus the model of banking the United States started with. And these bankers behind these private central banks will do anything up to and including a world war to enslave the entire planet and all of humanity to their system.
And one of the reasons that Islamic countries are getting so slammed is they do not charge interest on their loans. They charge a fixed fee, which the private central bankers would really love to see go away.
The goal of the private central bankers is to erase any memory or any understanding that there's a different way to run a national economy. We saw that back in 1913 when the Federal Reserve was created. All of the public schools stopped teaching about King George III's Currency Act as the cause of the revolution. They stopped teaching about how the colonies ran their economy. They stopped talking about how the early United States was based on government-issued value-based currency that allowed commerce to proceed without the bankers getting a piece of the action through interest, and which allowed America to become a major financial power very, very quickly. The schools don't teach that. They don't want your kids to understand that there actually is a different and better system for the people to be following. I remember when I was in grade school seeing those little film strips and the phonograph record with the bell on it that were brainwashing us even then that the Federal Reserve System is the only way banking can operate. There are no other alternatives, and this is really the best possible system that our nation could ever have. Certainly that's true from the point of view of the owners of the Federal Reserve, but it's not true from the people. We fought a revolution to be free of this kind of predatory banking, only to be sold back into that slavery by a corrupted Congress and a corrupted president 100 years ago.
Yeah, it's really nasty when you think of it. And I'm looking at all these confluences of events that are coming up. The huge drill in Jordan, the Syrian election, the alleged election which happened supposedly in Ukraine, and the fact that Ukraine is going to probably want to become a member of NATO as early as the 18th of next month. That's only in a couple of weeks.
Well, they're rushing that because, Ukraine is not a member of NATO, and
No.
NATO doesn't actually have any legal justification to be in there making stink face at Russia. But they've got NATO troops in there, NATO weapons deployed all around there, and now they're trying to basically retroactively justify it all by bringing at least Western Ukraine into NATO.
Yeah.
It's really just playing fast and loose with the rules. It's really all about wanting to conquer territory and grab its wealth to feed that impossible to pay off debt from the private central banks, whether it's the European ECB or the American Federal Reserve. And those election results across Europe tell us the European people have figured it out.
Yeah.
They understand why joining the European Union has destroyed all of their national economies. It was meant to happen. Whether it's Cyprus or Greece or France or Spain, they all understand that the European Union served no other purpose than enslaving their economies to that private central bank in Brussels.
Right. And I read a couple of days ago that Greece is actually selling off some of their most beautiful islands.
They're selling off islands. They're selling off 110 of their publicly owned beaches to try and satisfy the impossible debt.
Yeah.
And the same thing is going to be happening here. Even though it's not legal for the federal government to do it, they're going to do it. And what this really means is these private central banks with ink and paper created this debt, and now they're taking the nation itself to satisfy that debt. We'll be right back. And aloha, welcome back to our last segment of the program today on this Memorial Day. And the next story you wanted to talk about is...
Well, this is a place where I generally don't go, but I just found myself getting angry, and I am a person of faith and logic, but this just gave me a palm-to-forehead moment at almost terminal velocity. Franklin Graham, the Reverend Franklin Graham, warns gays to change their ways, or it's the flames of hell for you. And he was speaking at a group of conservative pastors and told them that he loved LGBT people enough to warn them that they risked falling into the flames of hell. I love them enough to care to warn them that if they want to continue living like this, it's the flames of hell for you, Graham said Thursday night.
I love them as long as they live their lives the way I say they should be living their lives.
Exactly.
Here. Well, I'll tell you what's going on here. We're getting into the primary season. We're heading for the midterm elections in November. And once again, as we have seen in previous years, the politicians are trying to fan up the fringe issues to get the voters all riled up about, whether it's gay rights or abortion or immigration or whatever. The issues that voters can scream and fight about but don't actually impact the core agenda of the U.S. government, which is the wars, the economy. They don't want you thinking about IRS targeting of dissidents going into November. They don't want you thinking about Benghazi going into November or 2016 for that matter. They don't want you thinking about the wars and the state of the economy as a whole, so they want to get you all riled up about the gays this and the gays and the abortion. And, obviously, I think at this point, this idea that homosexuality is somebody just decided they wanted to be that way, that's nonsense. It is genetically determined. And it amazes me that you have all these people who subscribe to the imaginary playmate in the sky saying he created everything. Well, he obviously created the gays as well. They have to have as much right to be here and have a happy life as anybody else. And I will go one step further, and I know I'm going to get a lot of hate email for this one. I think the homosexuals are absolutely essential to the long-term survival of the human race. You're always hearing everybody screaming about too much population. Bill Gates is out there pushing vaccines as population control. You've got the epicite corn, and they don't seem to realize there is a built-in population control mechanism in the human race, because if you go back and you study history, the per capita incidence of homosexuality increases in areas and times of extreme social stress. As more and more stress is placed on the mothers, the more likely they are to produce a homosexual child, who in turn for the next generation is not likely to be producing any more offspring. There's a natural mechanism there. It's supposed to be there, and it's not unique to humankind. We have seen in many other species, in particular amphibians, the ability to change gender or, when necessary, to get an ideal population density. And, you know, what this guy is out there is just screaming, you know, it's bad. They want to be this way. No, they don't. They absolutely don't. It's just the way they were born, and let's leave them alone. They have every right to be here and to have a happy life. Leave them alone.
And there's something I'd like to add. What I get from my understanding of Christianity, what I take away from my experience of it, is love. Jesus has said to us, love ye one another, but there are absolutely no exceptions in that commandment against the LGBT community. And the other issue I work very hard to remember is judge not, lest ye be judged. And apparently what Dr. Graham has done indicates that he has skipped every high school and college class on science available to him. So I'd like to break it down for him.
What's his doctorate in?
Probably a religion.
Okay, well, that sort of rules out science.
Yeah.
Okay.
And as you mentioned, modern studies of the nature of gender have found out that human sexual preference is innate. And, you know, it's not two compartmentalized poles, but a continuum.
And it is genetically determined. It really is.
Here's an analogy. Sometimes, depending upon the light and my blood chemistry, my eyes look a little greener. Sometimes they look a little more brown. This came in with the DNA, as does becoming LGBT. And how in the name of heaven can you condemn someone for something that came in the DNA? And my short answer is you can't. If you're a compassionate Christian, you can't. And it doesn't work that way.
And that is really very true.
Yeah.
Not just for gender identification, but skin color.
Yeah.
Okay. Height, weight. You know, humans love to discriminate. It's part of maintaining tribal identity, but we're sort of kind of past that stage in human history. And again, I think the real agenda here is to try and get everybody riled up about the gays ahead of the election so they don't have to talk about the true state of the economy, the massive unemployment, the continuation of the wars of conquest to serve the private central banks. They don't want you thinking about that going into November. So they're going to throw abortion at you. They're trying to fan up the feminist male bashing, recycle that from the 1990s. And it is. We see this same circus every time there's an election where they fan up these same fringe issues in the hope that they will distract you from what the government is doing and what the bankers are doing that actually affects your life directly. And that's what you need to stay on focus going into November.
Right. You need to be a 7-day awareist. Looking at what is going on in your life, what you were seeing, what you were hearing from the new media, and really polish and hone your critical thinking skills, because that's going to be absolutely very important as we move forward. Also, I'd like to suggest to our audience, please be very kind to those around you in the coming weeks and months. I feel very strongly that something very wicked this way comes, and one of the ways that you can kind of deal with it is just practice kindness to yourself and to everyone you come in contact with.
Well, I would take that one step further.
Yeah.
Obviously, this is Memorial Day. A lot of you are going out to barbecues and picnics, and that's a good time for you to start networking with your friends and your neighbors and start building that network to have it ready to go. If there is some kind of a major disruption, either to the food supply or economically, you need to be prepared to take care of yourselves because the government will not be there to do it, and they're not even doing a good job of it right now. But you need to start reviving the sense of community and the community caring for itself through some very difficult times to come. And this is a good opportunity to do that. You need to start pulling away from the Internet. Not completely, you need the information, but you need to start investing time in your friends and neighbors and coworkers and start building those friendships that you're going to need to help each other get through what looks like to be some very difficult times. Because whether they succeed in pushing this World War III forward or not, I still think there's going to be a major economic disruption in this country one way or the other. If we're going to have to go through it, I'd rather do it without a world war on top of it. But we're going to need to rely on ourselves We need to be independent of the big corporate food providers or the big corporate pharmaceutical providers. We need to become independent and reform those communities. It is so important right now. The only way you're going to get through this coming crisis is with the cooperation and agreement of your friends and neighbors around you on that block or several blocks around. And it's very important. That's the only way you're going to get through. Look at the collapse of the Soviet Union. They had to get through about 3 to 4 months of severe hardship while the new republic formed. And we're going to have to go through pretty much the same thing. And the only way we'll get through it is, take precautions, be a little bit of a prepper, stockpile food, water, and the rest of it, and form those network associations around your neighborhood so that you form a community looking out for itself. It is that important.
Absolutely.
Anything else in the last minute?
Just, again, be aware out there. If you have not started getting some food, storable food, potable water, extra medications if you take them for your family, your pets, now is a darn good time to start.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
We all need to be preppers right now. I mean, we all can't afford bunkers under our home.
No.
But storable food, extra batteries, survival radios. Again, for those of you on prescription medication, talk to your doctor and say, I want to be running my prescriptions 2 to 3 months in advance. Keep an eye on the X dates of all of this stuff. Prepping isn't just buying a bunch of stuff and throwing it in the closet. Prepping is a lifestyle. And you need to start thinking about that. All right, we're here at the end of the show. We're going to say goodbye. Have a good Memorial Day. Be very kind and supportive to our wounded veterans. In fact, all of our veterans. It isn't their fault what the U.S. government is doing. We'll be back tomorrow here on the Republic Broadcasting Network. Aloha, America.